Go ahead, Andrew.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm honored you want to hear what I have to say. I thought I'd start by just giving you a little bit of background of my school and myself, just so you have some context and understand where these thoughts and comments are coming from. So by way of introduction, Ridley College is a boarding school just over the border from Buffalo, New York. We're actually a pre-kindergarten through 12 school. We're predominantly boarding. Our boarding starts at 5th grade, so age 10. So 5th grade through 12th grade boarding, junior, senior boarding together. I am in my 24th year of doing admissions. I've worked in day schools and boarding schools. I've worked in single-sex schools and co-ed schools, Episcopal schools, Catholic schools, kind of all over the place. So I hope that what I can bring today, comes from a lot of experience and can be helpful to people. There's not a lot of formal opportunities for people to get ready to be a director for the first time. So this is an attempt on the part of SSAT to provide some ideas and some resources for people who see that as a career path. In our industry, there's a lot of Indians and there's not a lot of chiefs. So it's hard to break into your first directorship because there's a lot more associate and assistant directors, admissions officers than there are admissions deans or directors in our industry. And so you find yourself, if you're at the associate director thinking this is a career path you want to follow, you find yourself a little bit with the chicken and an egg scenario. I want to be a director, but how can I be a good director if I haven't been a director? And everyone wants to hire someone who's been a director, but how can I become a director? So hopefully today that will help you out today with that. As Karen mentioned, this is kind of a next step from the inaugural directorship, which was both a presentation at SSAT conference 2 years and a webinar last year, and I did that with my good friend Ben Douglas, who's the director of admissions at St. James School. So on this slide, and the slides will be available on the website that Karen mentioned, you can hyperlink off of that number 2 to the inaugural directorship to see what that was all about. Essentially, the point of that webinar was to talk about things. Ben had just finished his first year as a director, and we talked about things that Ben wished he had known before he had become a director, things that were a surprise to him in that first year. And so this is a bit of a prequel insofar that I hope to build on that and to provide a little bit of insight before you might go into that first directorship. A bit of a disclaimer, it almost goes without saying, but gosh, there are so many different kinds of schools. It's such an incredible industry that we're part of. So I apologize if some of the things I'm saying just don't seem to make sense to you. You think, my school's not that big, my budget's not that big, that's not my problem. But we've got a great wealth of schools in North America, and K-8 and boarding and day and independent and religious, etc. So just a disclaimer that I may not always be speaking right to you. But I will say that I'm going to go forward through the rest of the webinar with the assumption that the director or the dean at the school is a senior member of the leadership team. So they report directly to the head of school. I know that's not the case everywhere. And actually being a director of admissions who doesn't report to the head could actually be a good way to start your directorship so that you can be a director of admissions without necessarily immediately being on the senior leadership team. But it's certainly the trend in schools. Schools and boards and heads are certainly coming to appreciate and value the importance and the voice of the admissions director at that senior leadership table. So again, I'm going to speak a little bit under the assumption that positions you might be looking at in your own school or other schools are going to be senior leadership positions. So just in case you don't have time to sit on the whole webinar, or just in case you start to find it a little bit boring at some point and go to check your email instead, I'm going to give you my big takeaway first, right up front here, and that is you've got to talk to people. You do not possess within yourself all that you need to know to become a director of admissions. It's not that easy. You need to let people know that this is of interest to you. You need to let people know that this is something that you're working towards and that you're working on. Certainly, first and foremost, you should talk to your current dean or your current director, talk to your head of school, and let them know that this is your career aspiration. And I hope that they would be supportive and would want to help you learn and grow towards that, whether that means at some point to take that leap you're going to have to leave that school and go to another school, or maybe they can create opportunities for you along the way to keep you there. Certainly if you don't feel like you can have that conversation with your head or your dean, you need to be thinking a little bit about whether or not you're in the right admissions office if you don't feel like they're going to support your interest in this. But tell other admissions folks, tell colleagues that you might know professionally, tell people that you know from standing next to them for hours and hours at the fairs, whether it's day school fairs or boarding school fairs. Let them know what you're interested in. And they might be, as we go through this and we talk about things that you should be trying to learn or opportunities that you might want to seek out, they might not necessarily be in your own school. So if you work at a K-8 school, maybe there's a 9 to 12 admissions director who would be happy to kind of help you out because you're not competing schools. If you're at an all-girls school, maybe there's an admissions dean at an all-boys school would be happy to mentor you and help you out because, again, you're not directly competing with each other. So let people know that this is what you want to do and reach out to them because, again, as we said at the head of the webinar, there's not a lot of formal opportunity or formal program in our industry. So the way in which you're going to become best prepared to be a director is to let others be helpful to you. There's a concern among deans nationally. We're worried about where will the next group come from when this group passes along and moves into other roles or headships or retirement. And so I think you will find that any dean or director of admissions would actually be quite honored and humbled, to hear from you about they're helping you out or serving in a mentor role. We're all, we're long time committed to this industry, and we want to see the industry thrive. We want to see our schools thrive, and so don't hesitate to let people know what you're up to. You're going to have to cobble together a diversity of resources out in industry, outside our industry, from other schools, other people. And that's the way you're going to be best prepared. And before we jump kind of formally into this, just to quote my mentor and someone that so many of today's current deans and directors learn from, Dave Erdman, who was the Dean of Admissions at Rollins College and the head of the Essex Institute. Dave always said, all of us are smarter than one of us. And it's good, it's humbling, it's real, it's something to kind of live by. So if you can kind of keep that in mind and realize that you can cobble some collective smartness from other people, you're going to be in a much better spot trying to aspire to your first directorship. So let's get rolling. What is this job anyway? Let's start with what it isn't. And this may be one of those places where I first start to lose people because they think that's not my reality, that's not my school situation. But a director of admissions is not a glorified admissions officer. A director of admissions, ideally, should not be interviewing 5, 6 kids a day, doing parent meeting after parent meeting after parent meeting, tour of campus after tour of campus after tour of campus. Now, smaller schools, smaller offices, that's absolutely what some directors of admissions have to do. That's the reality. But I can tell you that the job that they're expected to do, the job on which they're judged, the job for which they're paid and they hold that title, it's not that job. So just kind of doing more admissions doesn't make you a director. So what is the job of a director of admissions? Because before we can talk about preparing for one or preparing to interview for one, we should all kind of come on an agreement on what is the job. And you know what? It's shockingly more than just admissions. I hear this again and again from colleagues and friends when they go into their first directorship. They're really quite surprised sometimes at how little admissions they actually do. When you move into a senior management position and you're sitting at that big table, you're no longer just sitting at the table in the admissions office when you're an associate director. But when you become a dean, you're sitting at the school administration table, and your job is at that table. And that reaches into everything. So there's 2 things I want to say on that. The first is the director of admissions is a mini head of school. And you can look in the most recent issue of the Yield, SSAT's publication, where they interview a few folks who had been admissions directors, and they've moved on to be heads of school. And that's a trend. That's a very growing trend. This is a great pathway to be a head of school if that is your goal in the end. But let's focus back in and just stick to our goal of being a director of admissions right now. But being director of admissions, other than the head of school, this is the person who knows the most about every corner of the school. I mean, you don't expect an 11th grade teacher to necessarily know where the first grade classroom is, and you don't expect your hockey coach to know what the billing cycle for tuition is, and you don't expect your billing office to know what league the hockey team plays in, but you have to know all of these things. It's a mini head of school. Other than the head of school, and maybe in some cases more so than the head of school, you've got to know everything from every grade. You have to know what every room on every building on your campus is. So when you become director of admissions, you are in a school-wide role. You are more than just the head of that one department. You are now in a role that impacts and is impacted by every single aspect of the school. So a couple of resources. Let's get down to some things here. The Marshall Memo, it comes out once a week, and there's hyperlinks here on all of these things. It's a good way to digest kind of what's going on in the education industry on the whole. It is not, I'll tell you in advance, it's not aimed directly at independent schools, so there's some public school stuff in there. But you know what, I find that quite interesting. It's interesting to see the context and what's going on with our colleagues in public schools. But it comes out just once a week. It's got 8 or 10 hyperlinks to it that go to different articles. But it's a good way for you to get a pulse on the education industry, because you're going to need to be able to speak to all of those things when you're a director of admissions. And if you can demonstrate as a candidate when you're interviewing that you can already speak to them, that will help you out, help you quite well. The webinar archives, which this will become a part of. The archives have all sorts of great things. There's a webinar by Amy Gruber from SSAT. She talks about board reports. There's one webinar in there that I quite like, Suzanne Walker-Buck. She'd be one of those people. She was a director of admissions at New Hampton, and now she's the head of school at Chatham Hall in her first year. She has a webinar on bringing out the best in your team. The Proof Group, which is a database company, they have a webinar on net tuition revenue. So there's lots of things in the webinar archives, and you should certainly take some time to kind of go through those and take a look at them and be familiar with the things that we're talking about in our industry. I mean, certainly if you look at the yield, if you look at the one that came out this fall, you know, it's got articles in there on accreditation, it's got articles in there on strategic planning, on marketing, on student orientation. This isn't, if you've been in admissions for a few years, this isn't the memoranda that you might remember from a few years ago. It's not your father's admissions newsletter. You know, there aren't articles in there on hosting the perfect open house or that type of thing. The articles in the yield are about things that impact the whole school, and the yield reflects the role and the job of the dean of admissions. So take a look at the yield and see what percentage of it is actually dedicated to just strictly admissions, and what percentage is actually dedicated to school-wide issues and school-wide topics that are important for admissions to know about, to contribute to be part of. So that's the first part of the job, kind of mini head of school. You got to know everything, everyone, every policy, every corner of the campus, and you need to be very well versed in all aspects of school life and be able to demonstrate that when you're interviewing, you're looking for your first directorship. What's the other part? What's the part that actually happens back in the office? This list could have gone on for slides. I stopped it at this list, but you're a manager, you're day-to-day managing. You're a strategist, you're thinking about enrollment, you know, what's it going to look like in a year from now, next September when we open, but what's it going to look like in 3 or 4 years? You know, the admissions officers who are doing the day-to-day work and doing all the interviews, you know, they're focused on next September. This is our goal, this is our number, this is what we have to accomplish. But as a strategist, you're thinking about long-term enrollment and where are those trends going. And so that's why you need to be a fortune teller, and you need to be a businesswoman or a businessman. And you need to be a therapist, all sorts of people at your campus, and a cheerleader, and you need to be an expert in lots of areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but you need to be an income generator. So what I want to do next is move into kind of what I think are the 3 biggest roles that you would have as a director or a dean. And let's talk about some resources to help you get ready for those roles. And get you ready to be able to present yourself as a strong candidate who may not have had this position before, but who has a really good understanding of the position and has done all that, you know, they possibly could to get themselves ready for that first position. So first of all, and these are in an order, personnel management, lots of it. It's always a surprise to people as to how much of their time will be taken up with personnel management, especially if you have a large office. But even if you have a small office that has its own personnel challenges, you've got daily management things. You've got people wanting vacation requests, and someone doesn't come in today, oh my gosh, who's going to cover their interviews for them? And your people who want office space and want better offices, and you've got to sign off on their visas and their visa bills, and you've got to look at their expense reports, and you have drama in the office, and now you're not part of the drama, now you have to manage the drama. So there's daily management of all the people in your office and the people who are tangentially associated with your office. It's like, okay, we need the athletic director, to be helping us out. We need the college counselor to be helping us out. So all these people are kind of tied into your daily management of people at the school and their roles in the admissions office. You also have long-term personnel work that you have to do. You need to be setting goals with your employees. You need to be doing regular evaluations and feedback with them. You need to be doing mentoring. You need to be evaluating your staff and think about succession planning. Who's on the way out? Who might be having a baby? Who might be moving out of the area? Who might not be? Look at your staff, who grew up here and has their whole family here and probably isn't going anywhere. Who went to college and had, a major that has nothing to do with admissions, and they might want to go do something else instead at some point, versus who are the people who really seem to be committed to long-term admissions. So you need to be looking at kind of your long-term staff and thinking about, their plan. If you want to keep them, how do you keep them? Again, lots of Indians and not a lot of chiefs. How do you create opportunities to retain the staff that you want to keep and make them feel valued and give them opportunities to grow and develop? And the last, that last little word on the third line is an important one to all of us, which is the pay. What is reasonable pay? How do you determine pay for those people you want to keep? How do you create opportunities for them to demonstrate that they deserve more pay than the just regular annual percentage increases? And then finally, kind of staffing in general. Do we have enough people? I know I'm hearing a resounding no from everyone through the internet. I don't know any admissions office who thinks it's overstaffed. So what people do you need? What roles would they have? What would the return on investment be? What's your argument to your head of school when you're the dean and you say, I really need someone who can do this? Well, why do they need this? Why can't anyone else do it? Why isn't it getting done now? Is that a problem? What's the return on investment? If we spend $75,000 in salary and benefits and we move someone here, from 4 states away to have this job, how is it going to prove that it's paid for itself? So you need to be thinking about those things, and as you get to know your staff, thinking about the responsibilities. Do you have all the people in the right seats on the bus? To quote Daniel Pink. So staffing is really it's a surprise to everyone in the first time how much time you spend working with your staff, thinking about your staff, supporting your staff. You can't have any initiatives, you can't have any great ideas, you can't have any strategies that are going to work if you don't have a good staff. Your success is going to be built on the shoulders of your team. And when you're marching up that hill of enrollment, you want to look back and find that these guys have your back and they're right there with you. So it's really important to dedicate a lot of time to staff management, staff development, staff retention, recruitment, etc. So some resources to hopefully help you out a little bit with that. Some suggestions before we get to resources. So you're thinking, okay, how can I do that if I'm just the associate director and I'm not in charge of the staff? Find some other people to lead. So you're not leading the admissions staff. Are there parent volunteers that you can be in charge of so that you can show that you have your ability to lead and motivate people? Can you be in charge of the tour guides? Do you want to, maybe you can be in charge of the support staff. Maybe there's outside of your school. Again, remember, some of these resources or some of these opportunities or strategies for you are going to be outside the walls of the admissions office or outside the gates of your school. So are you a volunteer in an organization where you might have the opportunity to do some evaluations of other volunteers or staff? Maybe you help run, the Sunday school at your church or other place of worship where you'd have opportunities to be motivating a group of people, doing evaluations on groups of people. So find someone to lead. Find some people inside your school or outside your school that you can kind of take some ownership of, and then be able to demonstrate to a potential head that you're ready to lead people. And maybe it's within your school but outside your office. As I said, personnel management's a big thing. So if you can find a way to help someone who has to manage people lighten that load, they are going to grab that opportunity and hug you. I know someone at one school who talked with the athletic director, and she ended up helping the athletic director manage a large staff of outside coaches they had. So these weren't school employees, but these were people from the outside who came in to coach teams. And so she was really helpful with getting them organized and helping them understand the culture of the school and the rules and so forth and so on. And he was able to write her a great evaluation in terms of her ability to work with all these outside coaches. So, look inside your office, look outside your office, look inside your school, look outside your school, and see where you might have some opportunities to take on some leadership. Talk to your HR department. Now, resources that I mentioned. The CASE Advancement Weekly. CASE is the Council for Advancement and Supportive Education. They're typically, your membership at your school is typically managed by your development office. Again, schools are different. It might be someone else, but start there. And if your school is a CASE member, I believe that any employee has access to sign up for the CASE Advancement Weekly. And it's a weekly newsletter. I'm quoting what they say on their website, ideas for managing staff and resources. It's really good. It comes only once a week, so it's not a huge burden. It's not like trying to read the newspaper every day from cover to cover. And obviously, you can put them aside and read them as you have time. But that's a great resource that's free. Kiplinger, I'm going to mention them a couple times. They're a pretty amazing organization. This is a link. You've got to scroll down to get to Workplace Solutions, but they've got some interesting resources down there you might want to purchase. The Society for Human Resource Management, they've got a number of things. Now, I want you to look at the asterisk because it's really important to appreciate the fact that HR law, if you're trying to learn about that, HR law is state by state. It's not, for the most part, federal with some exceptions. And the same thing for Canada. It's provincial and it's minimally federal. So you want to try to find a state-based resource to learn about human resource law and legal practices in the individual state or province that you're in. Tom Peters has been around forever. If the name sounds familiar, if you're old enough to know it, he wrote In Search of Excellence. That came out in the early 80s. But I don't think there's anyone out there with an MBA who hasn't read In Search of Excellence. He has a very active website. He has a very active Twitter account. If you like to follow people on Twitter, just know that he's going to fill your Twitter account. He has many, many followers, and he likes to reply to everyone who sends him a message on Twitter. So you're going to see lots of going back and forth between Tom and other people. So that's just a forewarning. But he's a great guy. He'll put out something. There's something just the other day on the Twitter feed. He said, have you thanked a frontline employee today? Something that simple. Have you thanked one of your groundskeepers? Have you thanked the food service people at your school? Have you thanked the woman or the man who answers your phones? He just puts little things out there that make you think when it comes to motivating people and being a leader. So he's worth kind of checking out. All right, so personnel management's the kind of the biggest thing that's going to be on your plate in terms of taking time and where you have to devote your own personal resources. The next one is money. Money, and we want lots of it, right? Just like every admissions office doesn't have enough staff, every school doesn't have enough money. The dean of admissions is the primary source of revenue for a school. Typically, tuition revenue at most member schools is going to be in excess of 90% of their annual budget. So, the school runs, people get paid, and the lights are on based on the tuition revenue. Fundraising, other sources of income, they're a small percentage of the pie, and you're a big percentage of the pie. So highly recommend that you give some thoughts to the role of the income that comes from tuition and your role in bringing in that income. You can't be a credible dean or candidate for a dean of admissions if you don't understand this. It's really important to understand your school budget. It's important to understand the role of tuition revenue in your school budget. Sit with your CFO, have them walk you through it. They'll have a high-level budget that they would probably be able to share with you that doesn't have confidential information like individual salaries or something like that. They probably have a budget that's at a high level by department or division. But ask them to be walked through, the expenses and the revenue so that you can start to appreciate what it is that tuition revenue does for the school. And your CFO is most likely, I'd be surprised if they're not, they're working on at least 3 to 5 years out. They've got a budget model right now. They can tell you roughly what they're thinking tuition is going to be in 2018-19. They're making assumptions about tuition rates. They're making assumptions about what the enrollment is going to be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And you know what? If you're Dean of Admissions, you need to be making those assumptions together and agreeing on them. As they're planning budgets, going forward, they are planning them based on what your office is going to be producing and what the market will bear for tuition, and you need to be having that conversation with them. So understand how the budget going forward is built and what informs modifying the budget. And then really important, understand the difference between numbers and revenue. And this can be a little bit of a tricky one. I'll make it a little personal, tell you a little bit of a little Ridley story here, what happened to us this year. We actually didn't hit our enrollment number. So why am I doing this webinar? What do I know? We actually came up 2 students short. But you know what? We actually, in the mix of kids, so even though we were 2 students short, in our mix of kids, we actually had 13 more boarders than we had in the budget, which meant that even though we were 2 students short, we were $753,000 over budget. We had more money than we were expecting, even though we were 2 students short. So you have to come to reconcile those 2 things. It's great if it's simple. I'm on the board of a school. It's 3 grades. Everyone pays the same tuition. It's just day. It's really easy to figure out. But if you're in a complicated school, if you're in a K-12 and you've got 6 or 7 different tuition levels, if you have day and boarding and they pay different amounts, or domestic boarders and international boarders pay different amounts, that model can get very complex. And so it's really important to understand your numbers versus your revenue. Now, not to discount numbers. Numbers are important. Numbers are psychological, right? No one wants to hear that you're down 10 students from last year. People wonder what the admissions office did wrong. They wonder why people don't like the school anymore. And you can say, but my mix, my tuition revenue is up. We actually have more money than I thought we were going to have. And people are going to look at you and say, yeah, but we're down 10 students. So you have to wrap your head and appreciate the psychology of the enrollment number and the reality of the enrollment number. If you're down 10 students, you need those kids to field a hockey team. You need those kids to put on a drama production and build an orchestra and do all the other things that go around schools. So it's certainly not an excuse to say, oh, we've lost a bunch of kids, but we actually have more money because of the mix of kids we have. You need to appreciate that it's not all about money, and there are psychological and practical things around having a certain number of kids. And then know your office budget. Similar, again, if you can sit down with your dean or director, they can probably show you a higher level office budget so it doesn't have individual salaries in it. Or they can even take the salary line out of the office budget and show you, like, this is how much money we have to work with. This is how I've chosen to allocate it as the dean. And this is why, and ask questions. Why do we spend money on this and not that? Why do we do marketing this way and not that way? Where's money that you thought should be there that isn't, only to learn that that's something that's covered by the communications office or the development office funds that, or the headmaster's office or something. So understand your office budget, and that's a really strong thing to be able to talk about when you're interviewing. And finally, know your market. Know your market's economic status. That's really important for every single person. I don't care if you're a small K-5 school and you're only drawing kids from 10 zip codes. You need to know what's going on in those 10 zip codes. You need to know what's going on in terms of housing prices. Are they going up and down? New home building rates. You need to know what's going on in your small little market. And if you're a boarding school, my goodness, you need to know what's going on in the world. The world is your market, and you better have an understanding of where the ups and downs are coming. Certainly, if you've been around for a few years, you'll remember a time, probably 8 or 10 years ago, when boarding schools were flooded with kids from Korea. Kids from Korea all over the place. It was overwhelming trying to manage the applications and the interest. And now they're not there. that market has dropped off tremendously. You can even talk to SSAT folks. Amy Gruber could tell you about the decrease in the number of Korean students taking SSATs over the last 5 years, etc. That you need to know what's going on in those individual markets around the world as a boarding school or locally as a day school. This is important to know what's going on in the economic world of where your markets are, because we're a luxury product. And when times are tough, people can do without luxury. They can buy a $20,000 car instead of a $40,000 car, and they can send their kid to public school and not send their kid to our school. So it's important to be sensitive to what's going on in the market. So suggestions. Again, talk to your dean about being involved in budget development. So when it's time for them each year, it's usually at the worst time possible. It's at the height of the admission season in the winter, when they're going to be asked to draft an initial budget for what they need next year. Ask if you can be involved in that, and maybe you can help out. And again, anyone would appreciate any help they can get. Meet with your CFO. Again, talk to them about the school budget. Talk to them about what assumptions they're making. What are the challenges of being a CFO? Meet with your development director, because they're the other part of the equation. You may be most of the money, but they're the rest of the money. And think about, I have a friend at a school who actually set up quarterly meetings, so just 4 times a year. It wasn't a big burden on the other people, but set up quarterly meetings with the Dean of Admissions, the CFO, and the development director. And he came with questions and had an agenda and let them know in advance so that they could bring answers and be ready to provide materials. And so set yourself up your own little seminar there. Some resources in this area. MBOA, that's the National Business Officers Association. And again, that's a membership that is probably managed out of your business office, most likely. They have a magazine called Net Assets. It comes out 6 times a year. It comes out in paper. It also comes out electronically. And if your school is a member, I believe I'm accurate in saying that, then anyone at your school can have access to the Net Assets magazines. That's a great professional journal to be looking at and can fuel lots of conversations with your CFO. Net Assets, it covers things like human resources and facilities management and sustainability and risk management and leadership and technology, because much like the Dean of Admissions, the business officer is one of those people who touches all aspects of the school. And so does this magazine. So it's a good magazine to get, and it won't cost you anything. Kiplinger, I mentioned before, they have a weekly letter. It's called the Kiplinger Letter. It's been around forever. I remember my grandfather reading it when I was young, and I read it. It comes electronically or it comes in paper. It's 4 pages long. So it's not a burdensome read. Again, like the Marshall memo I mentioned earlier, it only comes once a week, so it's not a burden to you. And particularly if you're in boarding schools, it talks about what's going on in the international market and international economy, but also does a great kind of SWOT analysis of what's going on in the U.S. and future trends. And gosh, they've been around for, I would say at least 50 years, so they must know what they're doing. So something to think about, and something that might even be of interest to your dean or your CFO, and they might be willing to fund that so that you don't have to subscribe to it yourself. Okay, I'm looking at time and moving on. We're actually on the last thing, which might seem a little ironic or a little odd that enrollment management is last, but when you're Dean of Admissions, those first 2 things really do take up a heck of a lot of your time, and you will be surprised at how little time you spend on enrollment management. But that's why you have great associate directors, because they can do the day-to-day management of the admissions office. But so let's talk about that last thing. So kind of what's the difference when you get into this enrollment management part? So data is king. There's just no other way to say it. You have to know how to look at data. You have to know how to analyze data. You have to know what questions to ask. You have to know how to segment. It absolutely will do you and your school no good if you're just looking at applications and accepts and looking at the yield rate for that. I mean, you need to be diving into that. What is it in boys versus girls, full pay versus, financial aid recipients? What's the data telling you about people who came to campus versus never made a visit to campus? What's your yield on people who came to an open house? If you have multiple open houses, what were the yields on each of those open houses? And keep notes during your open house. Was the weather bad? Did something go wrong? What might impact your yield? You want to be digging into your data, and you want to know who enrolled and why. You want to know who didn't enroll and why. You really have to have a strong sense of the questions that you need to be asking. Now, you don't actually have to be an expert in databases and Excel spreadsheets and things like that. Full disclosure, I am not, but I also work at a big school with a large staff, and I have really good people who do that for me. But I know the questions to ask, and that's the most important thing, because if you don't know the questions to ask, then you're not getting the answers you need to be able to make good decisions. There's actually an article in the Yield, this most recent Yield, by my good friend Lydia Hawkins, who's out of Strathcona Tweedsmuir in Calgary, talking about databases. So that's worth a good look. And she's got some really good advice, and changing databases or getting a new one isn't always the first step. Matter of fact, she says it isn't the first step. So take a look on that. But you want to be a data expert. You want to own your data. You want to be able to analyze it, describe it. You want to have it to inform decisions being made in your office, being made school-wide. So data is king. And if you can become an expert in your database or become an expert at Excel, that's going to make you even more attractive as an admissions director, particularly if you're looking at a small office or a small school where you are going to have to be the person going in and digging the data out versus just the person asking the question and other people go and dig the data out. Financial assistance. It's an enrollment tool. There are not a lot of schools that have more money than they know what to do with. Almost every school faces more demands for financial assistance than they have in their budget. And so now, and this is a trend that happened, I'm going to say 10 to 12 years ago, there was a time when tuitions were so low and financial assistance was appropriately funded that we could help everyone. But as an industry, we've just gone crazy in our tuition increases every year, and now we're at a place where very few schools can help everyone. So who gets financial assistance, how much they get, that's now actually a very strategic conversation. It's a strategic decision. What are the priorities of the admissions office? What are the priorities of your dean? How does that inform who gets financial assistance and how much they get? So you want to make sure you understand the macro of financial assistance. You also want to make sure you understand the micro. You want to be able to look at a file and be able to understand what a financial aid application looks like, what it's telling you, what you should be looking for. You want to be able to have an articulate conversation with the family on partnering with the school. How much financial assistance do they need versus how much financial assistance do they want? That's an ever-increasing gap. So when you're interviewing or looking to be a director of admissions, understanding that financial assistance really is not what it used to be, kind of this charitable status thing where we help out everyone we can, and it's now a strategic tool used to maximize enrollment numbers, but also enrollment profile and the kinds of kids that you want to have in your school. You want to be able to talk about that when you're looking to interview for a deanship. Know your market. You're the one out there. You have tremendous value because you're in the market. Even if the market's sitting in your office for an interview, you're out there in the market, and you're going to make a better dean candidate if you know how to read your market and to be able to bring that intel back to school leadership. What are families asking? What are they looking for? What are the things that you're telling them about your school that they just don't seem the least bit interested in? What are the concerns? What are the trends? What are you hearing from your feeder schools? If you're a K-8 school, a K-6 school, what are the preschool directors telling you? What are they seeing? What do their enrollment trends look like? The kids that are leaving preschool, are they just there because they're waiting to get into free public school? Is there a trend away from independent schools toward independent schools? You're the one who's out there and gathering that information. You have a unique perspective to bring back to your office, to your dean, and to your school leadership. And would be a great way, it would be great to find a way to demonstrate how that's made a difference. What did your office or your dean or your school do as a reflection of the intel and the insight you were able to bring back? That would be a great story to tell when you're interviewing. Retention. This is obviously very important. There's no point in getting kids if they're going to be walking out the back door at the end of the year. So as an enrollment manager, you want to be on top of retention. You want to be on top of customer service. Needless to say, these two things go together. This is really a hot topic right now in independent schools, but not many people have gone very far with it. This honestly it could be a great opportunity for you. Do some research on customer service and retention. Put together a proposal for your dean. Put together a proposal for your head of school. Maybe you can chair a task force. Maybe you can put together a study group with faculty and other employees. I mean, customer service needs to permeate throughout your institution. And given that this is really a hot topic, but given that schools haven't done a whole lot about it yet, this might be an open opportunity for you to kind of crack open that door on this topic and get in there before it becomes institutionalized and become the customer service retention expert at your school. You'll have data to show how well you're doing in terms of where your retention rates go. And again, dig that data, segment, segment, segment. Don't just look at your retention rate. Look at your attrition by gender, by grade, by homeroom, by financial aid, by zip code, whatever the case is, and be able to identify those trends. And then when you go to interview to be a director, and you can talk about how you had a direct impact on the enrollment through retention efforts and customer service efforts because you own that, that's going to be huge. Nothing more frustrating than working to get all these kids to come through the front door if they end up going out the back door. So suggestions, I've kind of hit on these as we've gone through just because I'm looking at the clock here. You want to know your data, your enrollment data, your retention data. Just talked about customer service. Learn Excel. Again, you don't necessarily have to, but again, if you haven't been a director before, it would be a good thing to have and a good thing to be able to talk about. I think I cruised through. I was a director before we got into all these fancy databases and statistics, so I never had to learn it, but in this day and age, it's probably good to learn it. Financial aid. Ask to join your financial aid committee. Now, those can be very sensitive. They can be very private. Obviously, you're talking about, really confidential information. So that may not be an option, but maybe you can talk to your dean about getting some case studies. Maybe they can white out the names of some financial aid applications, and you can go through them together. You can make a recommendation, and then the dean can check that for you and say, okay, that was your recommendation. Guess what? This is what the financial aid committee did. So maybe you can get some case studies. Again, this may be a place where you have to go outside your school. There may be another school on the other side of town. There may be a school where you know someone in the admissions office who will let you in a little bit more on the inside when it comes to financial aid because you won't know any of those families and you won't know any of those names. But you want to get in there and understand, again, at the macro how financial aid is strategic, but at the micro how to read a financial aid file, how to have a conversation with a family going through their data with them. So see if you can get your financial aid committee or your dean to allow you to be a more active role in that. And then if not, maybe some blind case studies or finding some folks on the outside. Some enrollment management resources. The Ritz-Carlton blog. I think everyone in my office reads it. We quite enjoy it. They tell stories. It comes out erratically, actually. I just got 2 in a row here, like in the last week, and I don't think I'd seen a posting from them in a while. The stories are hysterical. The one from the other day is about a Ritz-Carlton employee who went out in the middle of the night and found like an all-night tailor to tailor the pantsuit for some guy who had a business meeting in the morning. So they're just pure entertainment. But the philosophy around customer service and the way in which they interview for people to be in customer service roles and the priority that they put on customer service, very much worth reading. So read the stories for entertainment, but read the philosophical stuff. It's really worth reading. We've used it a lot in my office in my school. It's definitely informed kind of how we've changed doing some things. Rick Newberry has a blog that's worth taking a look at. Khan Academy, I just put up a link to one of their online stats courses, but there's other online courses you can go to, maybe a course at your local community college. I've also given you a link to SSS. Sorry, Canadian friends, that's the Apple of the United States. Go to SSS, and they've got some resources there on financial aid. They also run workshops, and there's no reason why you couldn't go to an SSS workshop. There's one going on in Miami right now, but they happen throughout the year. And they do lots of case studies there and talk about policy and also practical pieces. And so That would be really great to talk about in an interview. I'm not the director of financial aid. I may not even be on the financial aid committee, but because I want to have this role, I've gone ahead and gone to financial aid workshop to learn more about it. Okay, we are wrapping up on time, Karen. I've just got 2 more slides. So some final thoughts. Be ready to invest in yourself. So that last suggestion, go to a financial aid workshop. Well, if you're not the director of financial aid and you're not on the financial aid committee, the school may or may not be willing to pay for you to go, particularly if it involves travel. But if you talk to people and they know this is what you want to do, they might be willing to help. They might be willing to pay for the seminar, but you have to pay for the hotel. Or maybe what they'll do is they'll just let you pay for it yourself, but you don't have to take any vacation time while you're away or something. You know, I've tried to give you some free resources as we've gone through, the Khan Academy and things like that, the MBOA newsletter. But there's other things like the Kiplinger letter and other things that you're going to have to subscribe to and pay for. And so you should be ready to invest in yourself if this is what you want to do. And think about it as an investment. You know, if I spend this money now trying to make myself the best director candidate possible, then hopefully that's going to come back to me in salary dollars when I become a director. Become an asset, own something, take some action and some initiative on something. So for example, that customer service piece. There's more work in schools than we're ever going to be able to do. So there's got to be something at your school that you can own, that you can take the leadership on, and you can demonstrate your contribution to that area of school life. So in talking to your head and dean about your goals to eventually become a director, talk to them about where might be some opportunities, something that the school would like to get done but just hasn't had time or just hasn't had anyone who could do it. And maybe that's something you can own. It's great to be part of a team. It's great to go and interview for a director and say, hey, this is what the admissions office accomplished, or this is what my school accomplished. But it's even better if there's something you can own and say, this is what I did. I initiated this. It didn't exist before I initiated it, and this is what it's brought back to the school or what it's meant to the school. As I said at the very beginning, you're going to be a mini head of school. So you need to move kind of in your head from being an admissions professional to a school professional. Join school-wide communities that you wouldn't otherwise. You know, everyone seems to be doing strategic planning these days. See if you can get yourself on that committee. Maybe there's a faculty think tank that you can be part of. Maybe there's some new initiative that they're doing a study group on. Get yourself on things that have nothing to do with admissions because when you're director, again, you're going to deal with a lot of things that have nothing to do with admissions. It'll be good if you've had that exposure. Maybe they're thinking about dropping AP courses or something like that, so get into that. And attend other meetings. When you see on the calendar that there's a meeting for coaches and you're not a coach, go to a coaches meeting. Learn some more about, you know, life over in athletics. If you are in a K-12 school and you're in charge of pre-K and K admissions, go to the 9 to 12 faculty meetings. See what's going on in the upper school. So go to other meetings. Depending on your school culture, you know, it may be something that you need to ask permission of the person who's running the meeting. And is it okay if you're coming? You can tell them why. You obviously want to talk to your dean or director about, you know, time you might spend out of the office to be able to go to these meetings. But move yourself from an admissions person to a school person. Look outside your school for the experiences, and I've mentioned that a number of times through here. So look for volunteer opportunities, look for other schools. What you need, you may not get from your school. And then finally, and I don't mean to end it on maybe somewhat of a negative note, but when you get ready to make a move, whether it's internally or to another school, make sure it's a great place to work. Make sure it's a great place where you want to work. Great schools don't always necessarily make great employers. So it may be a great school and does great things for kids, and it's got, you know, a great admissions profile because everyone wants to go to that school. But, you know, behind the scenes, they may be, you know, working you as a dog, or they may not have a very generous, you know, retirement contribution, or they may not pay as well because everyone wants to work at the school, so they don't have to pay as much. So as admissions people, I think we can sometimes get caught into the trap of you know, we spend all day talking about how great our schools are for the right kid and the mission-appropriate kid, and it's our job to be positive and cheerleaders about our schools, but you need to be tactical and thoughtful when you're thinking about becoming a director somewhere, and make sure that a school that serves kids really well also serves employees really well, and specifically serves the admissions office really well. Are you going to have the support and the resources, the budget, and everything else you need? I'm going to blow through the last slide because we're a little out of time. You're going to be able to offload this on the SSAT website, but there's just some books that might be of interest to you. If I had to pick one, I picked the Michael Thompson book, Understanding Independent School Parents. It's very small. You can read it in a plane ride. But gosh, did it really inform how I meet with parents through the admissions process, and I've recommended, and I've had my whole staff read it at 2 different schools, and but the others are certainly worth your time. So Karen, I'm going to turn it back over to you. My contact information is here if we don't get to other questions. I'm not the best PowerPoint person in the world, so if I've given you a bad link or there's no link or something, please send me an email and I'll get that link to you, and I will stop speaking now. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Once again, I suggest if you're interested in having Andrew answer your question live, please go ahead and type that into your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll be able to read the questions to him. If we aren't able to get to your question, or if you think of a question after the webinar is over, please feel free to reach out directly to Andrew. Andrew, our first question comes from Jamie, and she's asking, you suggest getting to know your local economic market. What are some of the best ways to do this?
Well, first thing you want to do, put down the sports page, put down the Sudoku, and read the business section of your local newspaper, or read it online as the case may be. That's a great place. I mean, that's where you're going to see information about housing trends. That's where you're going to see information about employment, unemployment rates. You'll be able to learn about, new businesses opening and closing. So that's a quick, easy one, but you can also get involved in your local Chamber of Commerce. They have a pulse on the local economy and what's going on in your area. The other place that we cross over, a great resource on a lot of levels for independent schools, is your local community college. Particularly if you're a day school, you share the same market as the community college. And guess what? They have far greater resources than we have in independent schools. So they are tracking very closely the local economy, the local demographics, what's going on in the community, where the building expansion is. So make friends with the enrollment folks at your local community college, because they're keeping an eye on the same market you are in your neighborhood and in your crossover zip codes. And they've got more resources and are better at that than typically independent schools are. But read the business section of your local paper, particularly for a day school. That's going to give you a read on what's going on in your community.
Great, thank you so much. I just also want to bring people's attention. There's an article coming out in the next Yield on just a little blurb on the U.S. Census Bureau, which has an app available for your mobile phone that contains census data. So you might want to check that out as well.
Cool.
The next question is coming from Donnie. He says, I work in an office currently that doesn't have a director. One is supposed to be named in the next couple of months, and I really want the position. What should I do?
That's a great question. I mean, Donnie, you have the benefit of being in that office or in that school already, so you should have a sense of what are the strengths and weaknesses of your enrollment profile. Where are you guys hurting? You're not yielding full pay kids. You're not getting the gender balance that you want. You've got 30 kids in 4th grade, but you've got 10 kids in 5th grade. So my suggestion would be is try to identify what are the goals of your school around enrollment, and then try to identify how you can address those, or how you might have a plan. Hey, I might not know the answer to this, but here's my plan to get the answer, to learn the answer. Here are some resources I've marshaled, or a course I want to take, or some people I want to talk to. If you're inside that school and there's an open directorship, you should have a pretty good sense of where the gaps are. I'd also look at the rest of the admissions team. Where do you fit in with strengths and weaknesses? Good admissions directors hire for things that they can't do. Reference back to my saying I'm not a stats data person, but I've got great people who know how to do things with databases. So look at the team that you have in your office and figure out, where are the strengths, and then where are the weaknesses? Do you have no stats person in your office? Do you have no person who's great with parent volunteers? And how can you position yourself? How can you educate yourself or plan to educate yourself and demonstrate to your head that these are the things I believe the admissions office needs, and here's what I can contribute, and here's what I'm prepared to learn to be able to contribute to help us meet our institutional goals.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Jim is asking, as a dean or director, how do you evaluate your admission officers? Are there any key metrics you like to use?
Absolutely. It's a little different from school to school in terms of how you divvy up the responsibilities in your office. You can't say each admissions officer has to have interviewed X number of kids, because one admissions officer might be in charge of the tour guide program, so they're not as available as others are to interview kids. So you've got to, as much as it can be a lot of work, particularly in a large office, you've got to sit down and you've got to set individual goals with each admissions person on the staff, whether it's the support staff or the assistant directors or the admissions counselors or whatever the case may be, and sit down in goals. And goals need to be measurable, they need to be realistic, they need to have a timeline. So typically I think annual evaluations is the norm in our industry. So when you sit down this summer, you want to talk to them, okay, what are goals for the coming year for you as an individual person? So if you're in charge of the tour guide program, what kind of measurable goals can we come up with around the tour guide program, and how can you become a better tour guide coordinator? So for example, at my school, I've invited the tour guide coordinator. I said, I put aside some professional development money for you to maybe go visit other schools that have really strong tour guide programs. So do some research on who's doing a really good job on that. So part of my evaluation for that person would be, did you do that research? Did you use these resources I made available to you, which is primarily money to go travel and visit these other programs? How did you change the program when you came back? Someone that you have that's just on the road all the time, then you can be looking at something more practical. How many visits did you accomplish? How many kids did you meet with? Of those kids, how many applied, etc. But it's important to sit down and go through the time to set individual goals with each person. Make sure that they've got the resources in which to meet those goals. Make sure the goals are realistic and they align to the time of the evaluation. And it's just going to have to be one-on-one. And that's why I was saying earlier in the webinar, personnel is a lot of work. And if there's a way in which you can help your director or dean take some of that off of their plate, whether you're working with the support staff goal setting and evaluation, or you're writing a first draft of all the evaluations and they only have to go in and kind of clean them up and change them a little bit at the end instead of writing them from scratch. I think you would find people anxious to let you help them with the personnel management. But in evaluating people, it's all about doing it one person at a time. You can't have the same goals for everyone. There isn't an office goal that everyone's working towards equally and uniformly. Each person has to have their own goals, and they have to be realistic, and they have to be within the timeline, and you have to provide them the resources and support to be able to make them happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. I'll take one more question, and this one is, if I am offered the Director of Admissions position, how should I negotiate salary?
Ha! Great question. I think with most any position in an independent school, the time to do it is when you're offered the job. It's very hard once you're in the school to justify why you should get some sort of bump in pay or some sort of extraordinary raise beyond the same 4% or 5% that everyone else is getting. So this is absolutely the time to do it. And you know what? It's actually kind of the same answer to the last question. So when you're talking to the head of school, you want to be talking about goals. Okay, this is the salary, and what are my measurable goals, and do I have the resources for them, etc. And does that salary make sense? And you can certainly turn to other people. A great resource, Karen, I may need you to jump in and tell me the titles right, but the Jennifer Davises and the Kates of the group, they're a great resource. Our folks at SSAT that are out in the field working for us, they can usually find out some comparative information because they're a neutral party and can make some calls on your behalf and help you think about what a realistic salary should be. If you don't know GuideStar, it's one word, guidestar.org, go sign up for that. It's free. You just need an email address, and then you can go and you can look at the 990 for all the independent schools that aren't religious. And the 990 will show you the salaries for, I think it's the top 5 people at any school. So you can go in and see what the current director of admissions is possibly making, or what directors of admissions at comparable schools are making, to give yourself some kind of negotiating room, if you will. I said early on it's hard to get a bump once you're there. The one opportunity you might get a bump is at the end of your first year. So maybe you negotiate a certain salary, and then within that salary negotiate a certain set of goals for you to meet at the end of your first year that would then result in a bump, particularly if you're a first-time director, right? I mean, this is what this is about, and you don't have a lot of experience and you don't have a lot of measurable experience, and they're taking, a bit of a risk on you. So maybe you want to say, okay, I will compromise on this salary. However, I want to put something in place that allows me to make what I think is a more appropriate salary after meeting a certain set of goals. And remember, when you're negotiating salaries come with a lot of extra money for the school, because your salary is going to drive their retirement contribution, their Social Security, all these other things. So you're talking salary, but also think about some other things. If you're in a boarding school, can you get housing? Can you get free housing? Will they pay your utilities or not? Can you get a car, or will they help pay for a car? Something like that. What are some of your other day-to-day expenses that you'd be spending your salary on that maybe the school will pay for? Are they going to pay for a part of a cell phone plan, or can you get them to pay for the whole cell phone plan? So while you may not make as much salary as you necessarily wanted to going into this, if you can negotiate some other things, then you kind of come out okay on the other end, because your salary doesn't have to stretch as far. But this is your time. They're offering you the job. You're their candidate. This is you've got a honeymoon phase that lasts as long as the salary negotiation goes on. So don't cave here, because they want you, you want them, and this is the time to strike the deal to make it happen. This is a business. Remember, you're bringing in 90% of the revenue that operates the school, and the savvy head of school will understand that you're a business person, you're not an educator, and so they need to be thinking about their contract negotiation and their salary with you as a business person.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. And yes, our outreach team is more than happy to help out. If any of you have any questions with regards to that, if you go to admission.org on the Contact Us page, you'll see information for each of our outreach team. We also have a State of the Industry report that contains some broad overviews of salary information for the various types of independent schools, so that's also worth a look. So we've reached the end of our webinar time at this point. I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and a special thank you to Andrew for providing us with this insightful webinar. Just a reminder, a recording and Andrew's slides of this presentation will be made available on the webinar page in the professional development section on admission.org. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.